What would happen if Lewis Hamilton decides to leave Ferrari just a year after arriving? What if the reason is the most controversial signing that Maranello could do? Today we analyze the pump that could shake the entire Formula One. Hamilton and Horner incompatible? Horner, central figure of the success of Red Bull for more than a decade, is seen by some within Ferrari as the missing piece to consolidate the project. His title history, his under-pressure management capacity, and his firm hand to lead technical teams make it attractive to a team that still loads with the ghost of erratic decisions and lost seasons. But that vision is not shared by all, and particularly not by Lewis Hamilton. From the first moment, the name of Horner has generated a visible discomfort in the surroundings of Hamilton. It is not a secret that between them there is no good relationship. In previous years, Horner was particularly critical of the British pilot, publicly questioning his value beyond the dominant car of Mercedes. He even minimized some of his victories as the product of an invincible team, not a differential talent. These statements, although common in the political game of Formula One, were perceived by Hamilton as personal attacks, beyond natural competition. In addition to that, there is a deep philosophical difference. Hamilton believes in a team model based on mutual respect, internal diversity, and the construction of a collaborative environment where the pilot has a direct voice in key decisions. Horner, on the other hand, has been repeatedly indicated as an authoritarian leader, focused on vertical control and keeping the pilots under strict hierarchy. In Red Bull, that structure worked with Verstappen as the absolute center of the project. But in Ferrari, Hamilton is not willing to give in that space of influence that he considers key to his performance and for the course he wants to print in the team. Therefore, the only possibility of the arrival of Horner has lit all the alarms. It is not just one more figure in the organization chart. For Hamilton, it represents a direct threat to his vision of the team, his role as a leader in this new stage, and the identity he hoped to build in Ferrari. Thus the conflict is born. Not for results, not by egos, but for a background incompatibility between two ways of understanding Formula One and the role of leadership in a team that wants to be champion again. For more than a decade, Lewis Hamilton and Christian Horner have shared the stage at the highest level of Formula One, but they have never been on the same side. And that apparently lower nuance changes everything. Because when their trajectories are analyzed, a story marked by distrust, fierce competition, and in many moments, mutual contempt is revealed. The root of the conflict between the two goes beyond simple sports confrontation between Red Bull and Mercedes. What is at stake is an ideological dispute between two figures that represent opposite visions on how an elite team should work. Christian Horner has been, since 2005, the architect of Red Bull Racing. Under its direction, the team went from being an ambitious experiment to a winning dynasty. With Sebastian Vettel first, and with Max Verstappen later, Horner built two empires in two different. But he did it under a strong structure, where the team was more important than the individual, and where decisions were taken with authoritarian clarity. In that structure, the pilot is a piece of high value, yes, but replaceable if it defies the balance. That philosophy constantly collided with the values that Hamilton defends, which for years has promoted the idea that the pilot must have an active role in the strategic and technical decisions of his team. Hamilton, on the other hand, became the face of Mercedes since 2013. His domain was not only the result of an exceptional car, but of a team culture that revolved around him. Toto Wolff, his team leader, knew how to understand that giving Hamilton freedom and weight in decisions was not a concession, but a strategy. The result was historical. 6 world titles with the Silver Star and an influence that extended beyond the clues. Under that optics, Hamilton always saw Horner as the perfect ideological adversary. A manager who prioritized organizational power against the pilot's intuition. During the hybrid era, the frictions were constant. Horner openly criticized Mercedes' dominance, insinuating that any grid pilot would have won with that car. Hamilton responded with victories, but also with statements in which he made clear his discomfort with insinuations. In interviews, when asked about Horner, his body language said more than his words. Professional respect existed, but was dyed of latent tension. Even when Verstappen and Hamilton starred in one of the most intense rivalries in recent history in 2021, Horner was accused of Hamilton's surroundings of fanning fires with incendiary statements, especially after Silverstone's accident or the final controversy of Abu Dhabi. Horner, far from moderating the tone, reinforced his unconditional support position to Verstappen, further consolidating his distance with Hamilton. That confrontation story is the backdrop of the present, because now, for the first time, both could coincide in the same team, but not as allies but as main figures with decision-making power. And that's where everything collapses. Hamilton has not forgotten the public statements of Horner or the way he directed the crises in Red Bull. For him, working under the command of Horner would be equivalent to giving up the principles he has defended throughout his career. And if Lewis has demonstrated in 2 decades of F1, it is that its legacy goes far beyond the titles. It has to do with integrity, with coherence, with a leadership that does not tolerate being displaced. The possibility of seeing them under the same red shield seems, therefore, more a conflict announced than a promising alliance. None are willing to give ground. And in that train crash, Ferrari is caught between 2 giants. The story between Horner and Hamilton is not an anecdote of the past. It is an unresolved conflict, a time bomb that now threatens to explode just when Ferrari dreamed of rebuilding. If Christian Horner finally joins Ferrari, the consequences would not only affect the internal dynamics of the team, but could completely reconfigure the balance of power within the paddock. Ferrari, historically a hierarchical and highly political structure, would be faced with an unprecedented internal tension between 2 figures that not only collide in their forms of leadership, but also in their vision of how a champion team should be built. Lewis Hamilton, with his legacy, his media influence, and his participatory management style, would hardly accept to become a secondary actor in a structure controlled by Horner. And it is precisely that scenario that could lead to a drastic decision: to leave Ferrari before the project is consolidated. These types of ruptures are not new in Formula One, but what makes this possibility particularly shocking is the time it would happen. Hamilton has barely begun his stage in Maranello. 3 races, a handful of points, and a performance that has not yet allowed to see all its potential in command of the SF25. However, the threat of a deep structural change such as the one that would imply the arrival of Horner completely alters the foundations on which Hamilton decided to sign with Ferrari. He did not come just for the car or the sports challenge. It came for the promise of a transformation, by the dream of leading a new cycle. If that promise is broken, its exit would be a logical reaction rather than a betrayal. In addition, his departure would open a technical, media, and moral vacuum inside Ferrari that would be very difficult to fill. Hamilton is not just any pilot. Its presence provides credibility, global visibility, and an irreplaceable experience in championship management. Losing it would be not only a blow to the sports project, but also to the narrative that Ferrari tried to build since his announcement. The domino effect would be immediate. Charles Leclerc, currently in a more stable position, could be forced to take a position in this conflict, especially if the strategic decisions of the new leadership do not favor him. Internally, the engineers, technicians, and strategists who aligned with Hamilton's vision would be in an uncertain position. From the outside, the competition would be ready to act. Mercedes, who still maintains a relationship of respect and affection with Hamilton, could explore his return. Toto Wolff has made it clear that the door never closed completely, and with Antonelli still in an adaptation phase, a return of Hamilton would not only be a blow of effect, but an immediate solution to relaunch his options to the title. Aston Martin, in search of consolidating his project, also appears as a potential candidate. Lawrence Stroll has proven willing to invest aggressively in talent, and Hamilton's arrival would not only be a sports movement, but also strategic to attract more investment, sponsors, and visibility. For its part, Horner would face the challenge of leading Ferrari with a track leadership vacuum, a fragmented structure, and a divided hobby. Its management style, as effective in Red Bull, might not work in a culture as different as Italian. Unlike Milton Keynes, where the structure revolves around efficiency and pragmatism, Maranello is an ecosystem loaded with history, media pressure, and emotional expectations. Adapting will not be easy, and any initial stumbling could light a storm of internal and external criticism. On the global F1 board, this situation would mark a turning point. Red Bull would continue to deal with his own internal turbulence after the fall of Liam Lawson and the erratic management of Tsunoda. McLaren, meanwhile, consolidated as the current leader of the championship, would carefully observe how his rivals were internally. The coming scenario is not simply a dispute between 2 egos, but a battle for Ferrari's soul. And as the history of F1 has demonstrated, when leadership conflicts are not resolved in time, the price to pay is the defeat on the track. The question is no longer whether Hamilton can work with Horner in Ferrari. The question is, how much are you willing to sacrifice Ferrari to discover it? Because this is not a simple personal dispute between 2 strong figures. It is the reflection of a tension that travels all the modern F1, the balance between individual talent and the collective machine. And Ferrari, in the midst of his eternal search to be champion again, runs the risk of repeating errors from the past if he fails to harmonize both forces. Can a team win if your wardrobe is divided? Is it possible to build a culture of success when the two visible heads of the project do not recognize each other as allies? Ferrari's decision will have deep consequences, whether he chooses Horner as a new technical leader and he decides to maintain the current model or under Hamilton's symbolic leadership. Leave me your perspective in the comments. What would you do if you had to decide Ferrari's future with a single movement? Are you on the side of Hamilton or on the side of Horner?